Welcome to True Echo, where real pain meets powerful justice, and every voice deserves to be heard. Today's story will shake you. It begins with a shattered violin, a humiliated child, and two officers who had no idea who they just messed with. But when the truth finally hits, the fallout is unforgettable. Let's dive in. The late afternoon sun filtered through the trees at Jefferson Park, lighting the winding paths and benches with a warm, golden glow. The usual weekend crowd had gathered, families clustered near the playground, joggers moved in rhythm past the fountain, and parents sipped iced coffee while trading stories about school drop-offs and home renovations. It was the kind of place designed to feel safe, comfortable, predictable. But not for Malik. 10 years old and wearing a red hoodie 2 sizes too big, Malik stood near the edge of the stone fountain, clutching an old violin case against his chest. His dark brown skin glowed in the sunlight, his eyes flicking nervously from group to group. His jeans were frayed at the bottom, his sneakers tired from too many school years and too little rest. But today, he wasn't here to hide. He was here to play. The violin was chipped at the edges and dull from years of use. But to Malik, it was priceless. It had belonged to his grandmother, the same woman who once told him that music could carry him anywhere, even in a world that often slammed doors in his face. "You play like you belong, baby," she'd whisper as her weathered hands guided his across the strings. "And don't let nobody tell you different." Malik nestled the violin under his chin, drew in a breath, and let the bow glide across the strings. The sound wavered at first, uneven and shy. But as his fingers found their courage, the melody began to bloom, warm, steady, full of longing. Children nearby paused their games, tilting their heads curiously. A few wandered closer. But the parents were less enchanted. A woman with icy sunglasses and a tennis visor turned toward him with a sneer. "Figures," she said loudly enough for the others to hear. "Another sympathy act. Probably wants money." Her companion, a balding man in golf attire, crossed his arms and stared at Malik like he was roadkill. His mom's probably hiding nearby, waiting for a handout. Malik's jaw tightened. But he didn't stop playing. Not for them. He had almost learned to tune out the whispers, the ever-present judgment that clung to him like a second skin. Almost. His bow slid across the strings again, carrying a mournful tune that floated above the murmur of the park. But even music couldn't silence the stomp of approaching boots. 2 uniformed police officers crossed the grass with deliberate strides, their eyes locked on Malik like he was a problem to be solved. One was tall and broad, with a crew cut and mirrored sunglasses. The other was shorter, wiry, his hands twitching with impatient energy. Malik's song faltered. His heartbeat didn't. He didn't need to ask why they were coming. "Hey," the tall one barked. His voice cracked the air like a whip. "What do you think you're doing?" Malik froze, bow halfway through a note. The violin trembled under his chin. I was just playing," he said softly. "Playing?" the tall officer repeated, mock surprise coating the word. He looked Malik up and down, from his hoodie to his scuffed shoes. "You here with someone?" Malik hesitated. His mother was nearby, sure, but she trusted him to be here alone. To practice. Like any other 10-year-old. But now his silence only deepened the suspicion in the officer's eyes. A familiar voice cut through the air like poison. "He's been loitering for over an hour," the woman in the tennis visor shouted from across the park. "First it's music, next thing you know he's panhandling." "That true?" the officer asked. His tone was already a verdict. Malik's voice cracked. "No. I wasn't asking for anything. I was just playing." The officer stepped closer. "We've had complaints. You can't be making people uncomfortable." Malik swallowed, eyes darting to the children still watching him. He didn't understand why the music that made him feel safe could make others feel threatened. Without warning, the officer reached forward and grabbed the neck of the violin. "Let me see that." Malik's hands clutched tighter. "Please. It's mine. My grandma gave it to me." But the officer yanked it from his grip. The bow clattered to the pavement. Malik lunged forward instinctively, trying to grab it back, but it was too late. The officer turned the violin over in his hands like it was a stolen toy. "Old piece of junk," he muttered. Then, as casually as someone swatting a fly, he lifted it high and smashed it against the concrete. The sound was deafening. A crack. A gasp. A silence. Then Malik dropped to his knees. He reached for the splintered wood, fingers trembling as they gathered the broken body of his past, his safety, his grandmother's memory. The bow snapped in half beside him. The strings coiled like dead snakes. Tears streamed down his cheeks. His sobs weren't quiet or polite, they were sharp and aching, cutting through the murmurs of the now-gathering crowd. People pulled out phones. Some looked away. The officer stood over him like nothing had happened. "Guess the show's over," he said. "Time to move along." That's when she arrived. No sirens. No yelling. Just footsteps, slow, deliberate, slicing through the air like justice on the horizon. Camille Johnson didn't look like power. In jeans and a fitted coat, she might have passed for a tired parent or a lawyer off duty. But there was something in her walk, a silence that made space for itself. She knelt beside her son without a word, her hand settling on his back. Her eyes flicked to the shattered violin, then rose, sharp and unblinking, to the officer who'd destroyed it. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Her voice was low. Measured. Dangerous. The officer straightened. "We've got this under control, ma'am." "It doesn't look that way." His partner folded his arms. "Your kid?" Camille didn't blink. "Yes." "Then maybe you should have been watching him. He was causing a scene." "Playing music is a scene." People in the crowd murmured. Some had their phones recording. The officer was unfazed. "Look, the park isn't a charity. He doesn't get to camp out here with a busted violin and make people uncomfortable." Camille's gaze didn't move. That was his grandmother's violin. "It was garbage," the officer snapped. "You want to file a complaint? Fine. But you're both coming with us." He reached for handcuffs. Camille didn't flinch. She reached into her coat. And the room froze. Camille's hand moved smoothly, without panic or hesitation, pulling her wallet from her coat pocket. She flipped it open with a quiet precision that commanded attention. Inside, gleaming under the light of the setting sun, was her federal identification badge, the bold letters unmistakable, FBI, Internal Affairs Division. The taller officer's face twisted in confusion at first, then disbelief, and finally something dangerously close to dread. His partner leaned over for a better look and immediately stepped back, color draining from his cheeks. "I suggest," Camille said with cool finality, "you lower your hand and think very carefully about your next move." The taller officer blinked, frozen in place like a statue. Around them, the crowd stirred. Several people who had been whispering now raised their phones higher. A few gasped audibly, others exchanged looks. The tension cracked like ice underfoot. Malik, still cradling the broken violin, looked up in stunned silence. His mother's badge, something he had only seen once or twice when she left it on the kitchen counter late at night, now glinted in the open. She had never needed to flash it before. But now it was armor. A sword. A reckoning. Camille straightened. "You've just destroyed federal property, harassed a minor without cause, and unlawfully attempted to detain both of us. Do you have any idea what kind of trouble you're in?" The taller officer flinched but recovered quickly, puffing his chest in a weak attempt at authority. "This isn't your jurisdiction." Camille's voice dropped, cold as a blade. My authority doesn't stop at park boundaries. And neither do consequences. Just then, one of the bystanders, a younger woman with braids and a camera phone still recording, stepped forward. I got everything. From when you grabbed the violin to when you smashed it. All of it. Another voice joined in. Same. Whole videos on my phone. The crowd wasn't just watching anymore. It was bearing witness. The tide had turned. The second officer cleared his throat and stepped away, muttering something about calling it in. But Camille was already a step ahead. We're going to the station, she said, but not as a request. And we're taking this to your commanding officer. The taller cop hesitated, weighing the risk, but he knew. The glint in her eye, the way she held herself, this wasn't a woman you dismissed. He gave a curt nod, gesturing to the patrol car. As they walked to the vehicle, Malik stayed close to his mother, clutching the broken pieces like sacred relics. His legs felt heavy, but her hand on his shoulder kept him upright. His tears had dried, replaced by something quieter, deeper, not anger, but awakening. Inside the patrol car, the silence stretched. The officers didn't say much, only the occasional whisper into the radio. Camille didn't speak either. She just stared out the window, her fingers tapping an invisible rhythm on her knee. Malik watched her out of the corner of his eye, not sure whether to feel safe or scared, but knowing something big was happening. Bigger than music. Bigger than him. The station loomed into view, a squat gray building that looked as worn as the justice it claimed to serve. When they arrived, Malik stepped out slowly, still holding the violin's remains. His feet dragged slightly, like each step pressed him deeper into the ground. Inside, the building buzzed with casual indifference, officers chatting, phones ringing, keyboards clicking. But the energy shifted the moment Camille walked in. Her presence silenced the noise. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. At the front desk, a bored-looking clerk began to greet them until he caught sight of Camille's badge. His eyes widened, and his mouth snapped shut. We need to speak to the chief. Now, Camille said. Of course. I'll get him right away, the clerk stammered, disappearing down the hall. Malik and Camille were led to a waiting area, cold metal chairs against a beige wall, the air faintly scented with burnt coffee. Malik sat down without speaking, his fingers still curled around the jagged edge of his grandmother's violin. Camille stood beside him, arms folded, gaze locked straight ahead. Minutes passed like molasses. Then, a door creaked open. The man who emerged was mid-50s, clean-cut, and confident, until he saw Camille. His stride faltered slightly. His eyes scanned her, then dropped to the boy with the broken violin, and something changed in his face. Camille, he said, tone clipped. Didn't expect to see you today. Camille didn't smile. You will be seeing a lot more of me if this department thinks it's appropriate to sick officers on 10-year-olds for playing music in public. Nolan, the police chief, cleared his throat, casting a glance toward the taller officer who now lingered nervously near the hallway. I wasn't made aware of this situation until just now. Good, Camille said. Then let's make you aware. She pulled her phone from her pocket and tapped the screen. Moments later, she was showing Nolan the footage, Malik standing by the fountain, playing his violin. The officers approaching. The grab. The smash. The cries. The chief watched the video with increasing discomfort. When it ended, he exhaled slowly, fingers pressed to his temple. Camille, this is bad. It's more than bad, she said. It's a lawsuit. It's a PR nightmare. And it's a direct violation of civil rights. I want both officers suspended immediately pending review. And I want that body cam footage. Now. Nolan's jaw clenched, but he nodded. I'll take care of it. And I want a written apology for my son. Public. Signed. On record. He hesitated. Camille's eyes narrowed. Do you need me to make a call to DC? That broke him. No. No, I'll take care of it, he said again, firmer this time. Just give me until morning. Camille gave a slight nod. Then she looked down at Malik, who was watching silently, his face unreadable. She placed a gentle hand on his back. Let's go. They left without another word. As the doors closed behind them, the entire precinct seemed to exhale, like it had been holding its breath. Malik didn't say much on the ride home. But when they pulled up to their building, he finally spoke. Mom. Yeah, baby. Are they gonna fix it? The violin? Camille looked at him. No. But we will. The next morning broke with muted sunlight and the kind of quiet that settled over a city after a storm. Malik hadn't slept much. Even after Camille tucked him in with warm tea and whispered reassurances, the image of the violin smashing against the pavement looped endlessly behind his eyes. Every crack, every splinter, every cruel chuckle from the officer echoed louder in the silence of his room. But when he finally slipped out of bed and padded into the kitchen, Camille was already up. Dressed in her work slacks and a blouse, a mug of black coffee in one hand, her phone in the other, she was all business, except for her eyes. Her eyes softened when they met his. You hungry? She asked. Malik shook his head. Not really. Camille nodded, setting the phone down. She walked over and knelt beside him, brushing a hand across his curls. We've got a place to go today. Where? His voice was small. To start fixing what they broke. Malik followed her out with the paper bag clutched tight in his hands. Inside it were the salvaged pieces of the violin, the largest chunk from the body, a few string remnants, and the faded initials, LB, carved near the edge, left by his grandmother. The drive was quiet. Camille didn't speak much, but her fingers tapped the steering wheel in rhythm, as if she were composing something no one else could hear. Malik sat beside her, his gaze fixed out the window as buildings blurred past. He wondered if the people walking their dogs or buying coffee knew what had happened in the park yesterday. If they would have cared. When they arrived at the music shop, it didn't look like much, an old building with a red awning and a dusty window display of violins and cello cases. The sign read, Benhart Strings, EST 1946. Inside, it smelled like varnish, time, and stories. A soft melody floated from a back room, someone practicing scales on a piano. Rows of violins lined the walls like soldiers. They gleamed under soft lights, flawless and expensive. Malik suddenly felt small again. Camille walked to the counter, her heels tapping with purpose. An older man emerged from the back, tall, thin, with silver hair pulled into a low ponytail. His wire-rimmed glasses sat precariously on the bridge of his nose. You must be Camille, he said. She nodded. And this is my son, Malik. The man gave Malik a soft smile. I heard what happened. I'm deeply sorry. I've been repairing instruments for nearly 50 years, and every piece tells a story. Would you show me yours? Malik hesitated, then slowly opened the paper bag. The man took the largest piece gently, holding it in both hands like a relic. Maple wood. A little cracked, yes, but this? He turned it slightly in the light. This can still sing. He walked to the back room and returned moments later with something wrapped in velvet. As he unwrapped it, Malik's breath caught in his throat. It was a violin, new, polished, glowing like sunlight on water, but on its back, embedded seamlessly into the frame, was the salvaged piece from his grandmother's instrument. Not hidden. Not repaired to be invisible. But proud. Intact. Honored. I built the body from scratch, the man explained softly. But the heart? That's still hers. Malik blinked quickly. Can I try it? The shopkeeper handed it over with reverence. Go ahead, maestro. Camille handed Malik his bow, rest-wrung, clean, and light in his hands. He tucked the violin beneath his chin. His fingers found their way home like old friends, unsure but eager. He closed his eyes. The first note stuttered. The second rang clear. And by the third, it was as though his grandmother was standing beside him again, whispering in his ear, "You play like you belong, baby." The shop fell silent except for the music. Even the piano in the back faded out as if to make room. The old man leaned against the counter, eyes moist. When the final note faded, Camille placed a hand on Malik's shoulder and gave a small nod. She didn't say anything, she didn't need to. Outside, the sky had turned a crisp blue. Back in the car, Malik finally broke the silence. Are they really gonna do anything to those cops? Camille's jaw tightened. Oh, they're already suspended. The body cam footage went to internal review this morning. There's going to be an investigation. And I'm not letting it go. But what if nothing changes? Camille looked at him. Then we make noise. Real noise. The kind that carries. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Camille sat at her desk, typing. Malik watched from the hallway. He knew that look, her "no one's stopping me" face. Her screen glowed with open files, legal forms, press drafts. She was drafting a formal complaint, yes. But also a letter to the state attorney, to local media, to every contact she had in Washington. This wasn't just about a violin anymore. It was about what happened when people like Malik were seen as threats instead of children. About who got to feel safe in public spaces. About what silence allowed. The doorbell rang. Camille stood, wary, and walked to answer it. On the doorstep stood the woman with braids from the park. Her name was Ayanna. She held out her phone. I posted the video online, she said, almost apologetically. It's everywhere now. Your son, he didn't deserve that. Camille took the phone. The video had over 2 million views. Malik stood behind her, peeking around the doorframe. Ayanna smiled at him. They're listening, she said. By morning, everything had changed. Malik awoke to find his name trending online. Headlines buzzed across social media. Officers smash black child's violin in public park, his mom is FBI. Park violin incident sparks nationwide outrage. The sound they tried to silence. His photo, a still from the video Ayanna recorded, with his tear-streaked face and the shattered violin pieces clutched in his arms, had been shared thousands of times. People weren't just reacting. They were enraged. There were calls for justice, demands for reform, and fundraisers launched for Malik's music education. What had begun as a quiet afternoon in the park had erupted into a national moment. Camille sat on the edge of the couch, her phone buzzing non-stop. She had declined interviews all night, but now that the attention had shifted, she knew the real work began. Are you okay? She asked, looking up at Malik. He nodded slowly. Why do they care now? It was a question that sat heavy between them. Why did it take a video, a badge, a shattered instrument, and millions of views for someone to say, that's not okay? Sometimes, Camille said softly, people need to see something broken before they realize it ever mattered. There was a knock at the door. Camille stood, her instincts on alert. She looked through the peephole, then opened it carefully. Chief Nolan stood outside, hat in hand, his suit rumpled and eyes weary. Behind him, a city reporter and a camera crew hovered at a respectful distance. Camille, he said. You're 2 days late. He nodded, shame rising to the surface. We've begun an internal investigation. Both officers are suspended. Effective immediately. We're also issuing a public apology at City Hall. I wanted to know if you and Malik would attend. Camille considered him a long moment. You want us to clean up your mess? No, Nolan said, surprising her with the edge in his voice. I want you to tell the truth. Because clearly, people listen when you do. She didn't answer right away. Malik had stepped behind her now, still in his pajamas, clutching his repaired violin case like a lifeline. Nolan looked down at the boy and took a slow breath. I'm sorry, Malik. What happened to you should never have happened. And I swear, it will not be buried. Malik said nothing, but Camille could see the wheels turning in his mind, that same quiet assessment she'd seen when he practiced a tricky song, counting each beat before trusting the next. She turned to her son. It's your call. Malik looked up at her, then at the police chief, then back at his violin. I'll come, he said. But only if I get to play. Camille raised an eyebrow. Play. He nodded. If they're going to see me, I want them to really hear me. City Hall was packed. Journalists lined the back wall, flashes from cameras blinking in every direction. Locals sat in the pew-like benches, clutching signs that read justice for Malik, let black kids play, and silence is violence. Camille had seen it before, the sudden public attention, the media circus, the performative apologies. But this time, she had a different weapon. Truth. And music. When they called her name, Camille stepped onto the stage beside the mayor and Chief Nolan. The podium microphone waited in front of her, its red light blinking softly. She cleared her throat, then began. My name is Camille Johnson. I am a director of internal affairs at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. But today, I'm not here as an official. I'm here as a mother. The room fell still. My son, Malik, is 10 years old. He played a violin in the park, a violin passed down from his grandmother, who raised him on lullabies and symphonies. For that, he was accused, manhandled, and forced to watch the only piece of his family history be destroyed in front of his eyes. She paused. That destruction wasn't just about a musical instrument. It was about assumptions. It was about power being misused. It was about what happens when black children are treated like threats before they're even heard. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Camille turned slightly toward the edge of the stage. Malik? He walked out slowly, violin in hand, freshly tuned and glinting under the lights. The room was silent as he took position. Then, with trembling hands, he lifted the bow. The first note cut through the silence like a prayer. It was the same melody he had played that day in the park, soft and trembling at first, but rising, full and aching. Each note carried with it grief and memory, but also defiance. The sound reached every corner of the room, wrapping around the crowd like smoke, drawing tears, stilling fingers. By the time he finished, even the mayor stood in silent awe. Malik looked up, eyes shining, and whispered into the mic, "This is what I wanted to say that day." The applause was thunderous. Later, as people approached them with thanks, support, and questions, Camille crouched beside her son and whispered, "You didn't just take back your voice. You gave it to others." And Malik, for the first time in days, smiled, wide, full, and unbroken. The days following Malik's performance at City Hall unfolded like ripples in a pond, small at first, then spreading wider than anyone could have imagined. Clips of his speech and violin performance aired on every major news outlet. From local broadcasts to national headlines, the story had grown legs. Civil rights attorneys weighed in. Public figures tweeted support. Musicians across the country reposted the video with the hashtag #LetHimPlay. Malik became a symbol, but to Camille, he was still her quiet, thoughtful son who left his socks on the stairs and stayed up too late reading music sheets under his blanket with a flashlight. She guarded his heart fiercely, ensuring that while the world saw a message, she still saw a boy, her boy. But something in Malik had shifted. He no longer flinched at the sound of boots on pavement. He stood taller now, answered questions directly, and even started teaching a younger neighbor how to pluck simple melodies. It was as if, in the breaking, he discovered a deeper part of himself. Still, Camille wasn't done. One quiet afternoon, she sat at her dining table, documents spread across the polished wood. Legal letters, FOIA requests, state police misconduct files, and transcripts from the officers' past body cam reports. Her face was set in the expression that made junior agents tremble, focused, surgical, unwavering. When Malik came into the room with a sandwich in hand, he paused. "Are you making another report?" Camille looked up. "I'm building a case." "Against them?" She shook her head. "Against the system that allowed them to stay on the streets in the first place." She turned her laptop toward him. On the screen were 2 internal complaints filed years ago, both involving excessive force, both swept under procedural rugs. Same officers. Different victims. No resolution. Malik's brows furrowed. "They did this before." Camille nodded grimly. "They did. But this time, they picked the wrong violinist." He smiled at that, a little crooked, a little proud. Then he leaned over and said, "What happens next?" Camille folded the laptop shut and said, "We finish what they started." The next phase wasn't as public, but it was just as loud. Camille filed a formal complaint with the State Civilian Oversight Commission. She spoke at police board hearings. She organized a panel with educators, legal experts, and child advocates to discuss racial bias in youth police interactions. She even helped launch a nonprofit in Malik's name, Strings Unbroken, dedicated to providing musical instruments and legal defense to children of color wrongfully profiled or targeted. The officers, once smug and smugly silent, now faced disciplinary review. The community no longer stood idly by. And Malik found himself invited to perform in places he'd never dreamed of, community centers, churches, even a morning segment on national TV. He played each time with quiet grace and a fire that burned behind every note. He didn't need to scream. His strings did the talking. But perhaps the most unexpected moment came one morning when Camille received a letter in the mail, handwritten, shaky, but genuine. It was from the woman in the tennis skirt. "Ms. Johnson. I was one of the people who made that call. I thought I was helping. I thought I was protecting the park. But I see now, I wasn't protecting anything. I was just repeating what I was taught to fear. I watched your son play on TV and wept. I am sorry. I'm trying to be better. Elaine P." Camille didn't smile, but she didn't tear the letter up either. She folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer beside her desk, not as forgiveness, but as proof that even the most poisoned minds could sometimes recognize the rot. That night, Malik stood in the living room, violin in hand, playing the melody that once broke in the park. This time, it wasn't just music. It was a reclaiming. And outside their window, the city pulsed with light, noise, and the quiet, powerful hum of justice not yet finished, but finally underway. By the time summer melted into fall, Malik's name had become more than a headline, it was a movement. Schools across the country invited him to speak and play. Not as a celebrity, but as a survivor. A symbol of resilience. A 10-year-old boy who, with the stroke of a bow and the grace of courage, had forced grown men in power to look inward, and the nation to look harder at itself. Camille, meanwhile, had been nominated for a departmental commendation, not for her rank or tenure, but for extraordinary service in the pursuit of civil accountability. She didn't bask in the praise. She didn't have time for that. Her focus remained razor sharp. Reform wasn't a wave you rode, it was a road you walked, brick by brick. At home, however, things felt more normal than ever. Dinner was still spaghetti on Tuesdays. Malik still hated folding laundry. Camille still muttered at the dishwasher when it jammed. But beneath the surface, something was undeniably different, a sense of dignity and groundedness that had been reforged through fire. Then one afternoon, something unexpected arrived. A sleek black SUV pulled up outside their building. Camille opened the door, immediately alert, until she recognized the driver. A woman in a tailored blue blazer stepped out and offered a crisp salute. "Director Johnson," she said. Camille's eyes narrowed. "Technically I'm off duty." The woman smiled. "Technically, this isn't about work. It's about an invitation. From the White House." Camille blinked. "Excuse me. You and your son are requested to attend a ceremony next week. The president wants to honor Malik for his bravery and poise, and you, for your service and action." Malik, who had wandered to the door at the sound of voices, nearly dropped his juice box. "Wait, what?" Camille couldn't help but smile. "They want you to perform," the woman added. "On the South Lawn. With the National Youth Orchestra." Malik's eyes went wide. "Like, in front of everyone?" The woman nodded. "The whole country, if they tune in." He turned slowly to his mother. "Do I have to wear a suit?" "Yes," Camille said without hesitation. The day of the ceremony was blindingly bright, the kind of day that demanded you stand tall. The South Lawn was adorned with white tents and rows of chairs filled with senators, musicians, educators, and young leaders. The podium was flanked by flags, the breeze gentle but steady. Malik stood backstage with his violin, now fitted with a custom chin rest bearing the initials LB. His grandmother. His anchor. Camille stood nearby in a charcoal suit, her badge tucked away, her composure still ironclad. But today, her role wasn't agent, director, or advocate. She was just Malik's mother. When the MC finally called his name, Malik walked onto the stage with a calm that belied his age. He wasn't nervous. He was ready. He had been made ready by every whispered insult, every shattered note, every time someone saw his skin before they saw him. He tucked the violin beneath his chin and began. The melody wasn't just music, it was a journey. A retelling. From heartbreak to healing. The audience didn't cough, shift, or even blink. They listened. Deeply. Reverently. Because they knew this wasn't a performance. This was history. When the last note faded, the applause rose like a tide. Not loud and chaotic, but thunderous in its unity. The president himself stood and clapped, slowly, respectfully. Later, as photos were taken and hands were shaken, Malik leaned over to Camille and whispered, "Grandma would have hated all this attention." Camille laughed, the first real laugh in weeks. "She would have dragged you off the stage by your collar. And then made me play again," Malik said with a grin. Camille put an arm around his shoulder. "Exactly." That night, back in their quiet apartment, with the lights dimmed and the noise behind them, Malik set his violin down carefully in its case. Camille sat beside him on the couch, her heels kicked off, a rare moment of stillness surrounding them. "You know," she said softly, "this doesn't have to define you." Malik turned. "What do you mean?" "You've become something big to a lot of people. But if you ever want to be just a kid again, play music for yourself, not the world, that's okay too." Malik thought for a moment. "I like playing for me. But I think I want to keep playing for people who feel like me. People who feel like they don't belong." Camille reached over, brushing his cheek gently. "Then do it. And never stop." The city hummed quietly beyond their windows. And somewhere, in a park not so far away, a boy with a violin was no longer afraid of the silence between the notes. The first time Malik returned to Jefferson Park, the leaves had started turning gold. Autumn whispered through the trees, brushing against the grass where it had all happened. The fountain still stood, the benches still lined the paths, and parents still laughed with coffee cups in hand. But now, a new plaque sat beneath the old oak tree at the park's edge. In honor of Malik Johnson, because every child deserves to be heard. Malik stood in front of it, his violin case in hand, his new polished shoes crunching the gravel beneath him. He was taller now, maybe just an inch or two, but it wasn't his height that had changed. It was his presence. Children ran past him without fear. A little girl with pigtails waved. "Hey, you're the boy who played on TV." He smiled. "That's me." She grinned and skipped away, humming something faintly familiar. One of his songs. Camille sat on a nearby bench, watching quietly. She didn't interfere. She didn't hover. She simply observed the way her son stood, not just in a space that once hurt him, but owning it. Taking it back. Malik stepped to the same spot where he once stood trembling in front of officers and a crowd that judged him before they listened. He opened the case and gently lifted the violin. The familiar weight settled in his arms, and he drew in a long, steady breath. The first note he played wasn't mournful. It was bright. Bold. He played a medley, one that flowed from soft to strong, from sorrow to triumph. It wasn't about protest anymore. It was about presence. Every sound that floated from the strings said, "I am still here. And I always will be." As the final notes trailed off into the crisp afternoon air, something remarkable happened. Applause. Not polite. Not forced. Not performative. Real. The kind that came from people who had seen, learned, and understood. Among the crowd were familiar faces: Ayana, the woman who had filmed the moment that changed everything. Mr. Bernhard, the violin repairman, stood near the edge of the grass, tears brimming behind his glasses. Even Chief Nolan had shown up, standing silently by the path, his hands in his pockets, nodding slowly with something like respect. Camille rose from the bench as Malik packed his violin away. She walked over and put an arm around his shoulders. "You ready?" she asked. "Almost." He looked back at the park, no longer a crime scene in his memory, but a stage reclaimed. "Do you think they'll remember?" he asked. Camille followed his gaze. "Some will. Some won't. But you didn't do it to be remembered. You did it so the next kid wouldn't have to." Malik nodded. As they walked away together, Camille's phone buzzed. A news alert lit up the screen. Officers formally terminated following public pressure and internal review. She didn't even smile. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about what came next. About Malik. About all the kids like him who carried music in their hearts and fear in their shadows, and who would now know that they had a place, a voice, and a right to be heard. Because sometimes, all it takes is one shattered song to echo louder than the silence ever could. And Malik's song. It would never be broken again. What started as a moment of heartbreak became a symphony of justice. Malik's story reminds us that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes, it sounds like a trembling note played in defiance, in memory, in hope. And when truth meets resilience, even the most broken pieces can create something more powerful than before. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to True Echo. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And tell us in the comments, have you ever seen injustice turned into something beautiful? Your voice matters, and together, we amplify the stories that need to be heard.